The bolt from the castle wall. On the 26th of March, 1199, on a hill in central France, a teenage boy on a castle wall fired a single crossbow bolt at the most famous king in Christendom and killed him within 11 days. The king had been born in Oxford, crowned at Westminster, and could not speak a sentence of English. The boy was a defender at a small fortress called Châlus-Chabrol, armed with a crossbow and a frying pan he was using as a shield. The king was Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, the man who had fought Saladin to a standstill outside Jerusalem and been ransomed from the Holy Roman Emperor for 3 years of England's entire royal income. He was 41 years old. He had been King of England for 10 years. He had spent perhaps 6 months of those 10 years inside the country he ruled. He had 30 seconds of life he didn't know about. The boy from Aquitaine. Richard was born on the 8th of September, 1157, at Beaumont Palace in Oxford. His father was Henry II of England, first king of the Plantagenet dynasty, grandson of Geoffrey of Anjou. His mother was Eleanor of Aquitaine, the most powerful woman in 12th century Europe, heiress to a duchy bigger and richer than England itself. When Richard was 9, his mother took him to Aquitaine and made him its duke. He was raised in the court at Poitiers, speaking Occitan, the language of his mother's troubadours. He spoke Norman French at his father's court. He understood Latin. He never learned English. By 16, he was already in armed rebellion against his own father. And then his father died, and the inheritance was bigger than England. The Lionheart is crowned in 1189. After years of civil war between father and sons, Henry II died at Chinon Castle, broken and betrayed by his favorite son John. The chronicles record that when Richard knelt beside his father's corpse, he was seen to bleed from the nose, in the medieval belief that the body of a murdered man bleeds in the presence of his killer. Richard was now King of England. He was crowned at Westminster on the 3rd of September, 1189, at 31 years old. He had inherited not only England, but Normandy, Anjou, Poitou, and Aquitaine, the largest territorial inheritance in medieval Europe outside the Holy Roman Empire. He stayed in England for 4 months. He sold royal offices, sheriffdoms, castles, honors, anything that could be sold for cash, reportedly saying he would have sold London itself if he could have found a buyer. He needed the money for one thing. He had taken the cross. If you're still here, you already know these aren't the stories the textbooks kept. Subscribe for the names history tried to bury. We put one out every single day. Now back to it, because Jerusalem had already fallen. The Third Crusade. The Third Crusade had been called by Pope Gregory VIII in 1187 after Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, destroyed the Crusader army at the Battle of Aquitaine and recaptured Jerusalem for Islam. Richard sailed for the Holy Land in 1190. On the way, he captured the island of Cyprus from a renegade Byzantine prince. It would remain in Western European hands for the next 400 years. He arrived at the siege of Acre in June 1191. Within a month, the city surrendered. Then Richard ordered the execution of 2,700 Muslim prisoners after Saladin failed to deliver the agreed ransom on time. The Acre massacre would shadow his reputation in the Islamic world for centuries. He won the Battle of Arsuf in September 1191, one of the few decisive Crusader victories of the entire crusading era. He marched twice on Jerusalem and turned back both times, calculating he had the army to take the city but not to hold it. He never recaptured Jerusalem. But in 1192, he negotiated a treaty with Saladin, granting Christian pilgrims protected access to the holy sites. It was the most successful failure in the history of the Crusades. He never made it home. Capture and ransom. Sailing home in late 1192, Richard's ship was wrecked in the Adriatic. He tried to cross Europe overland in disguise and was captured near Vienna by Leopold V of Austria, who had a personal grudge from the crusade. Leopold sold him to the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI. Richard was held for 14 months. The ransom was 150,000 silver marks, roughly 3 times England's annual royal revenue. Eleanor of Aquitaine, his 70-year-old mother, raised it. He walked out in February 1194 and reached England in March. He stayed for 2 months, the last time he ever set foot in the country he ruled. Then he sailed for Normandy and spent the rest of his life at war with King Philip II of France. He had 5 years left. The last 5 years. Between 1194 and 1199, Richard fought a brilliant campaign to recover the Norman castles Philip had seized while he was on crusade and in captivity. He built the massive fortress of Château Gaillard above the Seine. He won battle after battle. In March 1199, a peasant in the Limousin uncovered a hoard of buried gold. Richard, as feudal overlord, claimed it. The local viscount refused to hand it over. Richard rode south to Châlus-Chabrol and besieged it. The garrison was tiny. The siege should have lasted hours. The kitchen boy. On the evening of the 26th of March, Richard was inspecting the siege lines too close to the castle walls, wearing only light armor. A defender on the wall, named in the chronicles as Pierre Basile, stepped out from behind a parapet with a crossbow and a frying pan he had been using as a shield. He fired. The bolt struck Richard in the left shoulder, just below the neck. He pulled it out himself. The wound looked survivable, but the head of the bolt had been driven deep, and the field surgeon's attempts to remove it caused the wound to become gangrenous. 11 days later, on the 6th of April, Richard the Lionheart died. On his deathbed, he reportedly summoned the boy who had shot him, asked his name, asked why, and pardoned him on the spot. Live on, the chronicler Roger of Howden records the king's words, and by my bounty behold the light of day. Some chronicles say the boy was avenging a father and 2 brothers Richard had killed in a previous raid. After Richard died, the captain of his mercenary company, a Provençal named Mercadier, had the boy seized, flayed alive, and hanged. The tomb that vanished Richard was buried in 3 places. His heart was sent to Rouen Cathedral. His body was buried at Fontevraud Abbey in Anjou at the feet of his father Henry II. His entrails were buried at Châlus, the place of his death. 600 years later, during the French Revolution, the same revolutionary mob that destroyed his great-grandfather Geoffrey of Anjou's tomb at Le Mans reached Fontevraud Abbey. The Plantagenet tombs were broken open. The bones of Richard, Henry II, and Eleanor of Aquitaine were scattered across the abbey floor. The heart at Rouen survived. It was rediscovered in 1838 and analyzed in 2013. Chemical analysis showed it had been embalmed with frankincense, myrtle, daisies, and mint, possibly the most expensively preserved organ in medieval history. The heart itself is now brown powder, sealed in a glass vial. The boy who killed him has no known grave. The bolt cannot be identified among the hundreds found at Châlus. The king who barely spoke English is buried, as bones and powder and dust, across 3 different countries. And the country he ruled in name kept no piece of him at all. Let me know in the comments if you had heard the full story of Richard the Lionheart before this, and what detail surprised you the most. Thank you for watching. If you want more content like this, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss out. Let us know in the comments below. Richard never lived in England, never spoke its language, sold its offices to fund his crusade, and died across the channel from a wound inflicted by a teenage boy with a frying pan for a shield. Do you think he was one of England's greatest kings, as the legend says? Or one of its worst, as the actual record suggests? And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see it. Hey, before you go, look at your screen right now. See that first video element that is going to appear right there? That's the previous episode of the Complete Codex series in case you missed it. And that second one right next to it? That's the complete binge-worthy Complete Codex playlist waiting for you. Trust me. This is one of those series you'll want to watch end to end. Every forgotten name, every buried story, every life that history almost lost. Go ahead and click both of them right now and keep the deep dive going. You know you want to. Thanks for watching.